Welcome. We're starting today talking about how to boost your ROI on starter. Okay, so the definition of those two terms, ROI and starter, are I think very different in terms of clarity. When it comes to ROI, everybody knows what we're talking about, right? There's money out, there's money back, and how we do the mathematical formula is pretty straightforward to calculate ROI. But in the long and short of it, more has to come in than what goes out, right? So that's pretty easily defined, understood, and communicated. However, when you get to starter, I have found that that is not clearly understood what we mean by starter. It's amazing how many I'll get in these conversations with people, and after about the fourth or fifth sentence, I'll start to realize, oh, they're thinking that that's starter, right? And then we have to start asking clarifying questions of what we mean. So we're going to talk about that. If you go online and look up for pictures on Google Images on starter fertilizer, you will find a whole range of what those look like, which roots are going where the placement is, and the whole dynamic between roots and the fertilizer. You'll see very wide-ranging results. I take this definition from a Pioneer report. I think it's a good sentence that defines it well. Starter fertilizer is defined as small amounts of plant nutrients, N, P, and K. We're going to be talking mostly about P in this talk. Small amounts of plant nutrients placed in close proximity to the seed, usually at planting. Placement can be directly below, to the side, to the side and below. Growers sometimes consider broadcast or liquid fertilizer application to the soil surface as starter. However, these should not be included because nutrient placement is positionally unavailable to early seedling growth. And this last sentence really drives it home. To be starter, nutrients must be strategically positioned to enhance early seedling vigor and development. Okay? That early seedling plant, the development and vigor, that has to be affected by your placement, right? So, if we put it in the trench, is that starter? Yes. Put it on the surface? No. 2x2? Uncertain, right? Is it really strategically positioned to affect early seedling growth? Whatever your definition, whenever you see pictures about starter fertilizer trials, you'll always see this comparison of two plants side by side and two different heights. You might see Ken Ferry on one knee where he's got his right hand on this plant and his left hand on this plant, showing the 4 to 5 inches difference in height, right? Commonly seen. That's one thing that starter does every year, is it makes plants grow faster. Okay? So trending wise, where you typically see starter fertilizer used more than not, you'll find it used more in the northern part of the Corn Belt than you'll see it in the southern part of the Corn Belt. You'll see it used more in no-till practices than you will in conventional till practices. And you'll see it in poorly drained soils more than you will in well-drained soils. Okay? Trending-wise, that's where you're more likely to see it. And if you think about, all three of those have to do with temperature. You're in the cool part of the climate. You're a tillage practice that takes longer for the soil temperatures to warm up. You're in a part of the field that stays damp, and damp means cool. If you look at thermal imagery of fields where there's places that dry out later than earlier, they're always 5 to 10 degrees cooler on a good warming day. Okay? Little microclimates within the field. Coarse soils and low phosphorus soils, those are just soil deficiencies. And the late planting and early planting, why you would use it, those are risk management reasons for different reasons. You're managing risk. If you plant on, let's talk about early planting first. If you plant mid to late April, you don't know what the temperatures are going to look like for the next 3 to 5 weeks, right? And what happens is, if the temperatures dive, it's nice warming soils, the mineralization engine's moving, and all of a sudden we go into a temperature dive down into the 30s and 40s for a day or two. Then after that, it kicks back in, it gets back up into the 60s and 70s. What's going to happen is, during the dive, the population of microbes will die. And then when it warms up again, the population of your microbes will just skyrocket. okay? And there's going to be a day or two or three until the microbes start dying off and replenishing the nutrients. And during that 2 to 3 day window, they're going to clean off all the shelves in the grocery store. Restaurants and the grocery stores are cleaned out of phosphorus and nitrogen, and the plant's left high and dry. Okay, that's called an immobilization event. Okay, that's the dynamics of it. And if that happens when that plant is in that very critical phase, when it's making lifelong decisions about girth and length, it'll get stressed and it will pull back. And those are lifelong decisions that can never be gotten back. Okay? If it makes a decision through that stage to put on big ears, it can always reduce over time if it gets stressed with heat or water or nutrients later on. But it can never add to. Once it decides to go from 18 to 16, it'll never go back to 18. Once it decides to go from 44 down to 36, it'll never go back. So we're trying to, so risk management of early planting is all about ensuring that that concentrated band of phosphorus and nitrogen will not leave the plant high and dry during an immobilization cycle. It's risk management, okay? Now, on the other side, late planting, it's risk management for a different reason, okay? Like this plant, this stuff that you're looking at, it was planted on May 16th. That's late for us. We don't know how the GDUs are going to look that year. We're behind the 8 ball, right? We need something that will get those solar collectors out sooner and faster. And if you look at the table at the bottom right corner, they're looking at a half dozen hybrids with and without starter. Second to the right column shows the differences in yield, and the right column shows the differences in GDUs required to get to pollination. Okay? 9 bushel difference on average, and on GDUs, an average of 71 less GDUs to get to pollination. So in the early phase of growth, when the plant's down there V3, V4, we're typically looking at 20 to 22 GDUs per day, right? So if you got 71 GDU advantage, you're buying yourself 3 to 5 days. That's all you're doing, which on a late planting window might be really valuable, okay? So risk management for 2 different reasons, okay? All right, I want to talk about something a little bit uncomfortable. Emotions, feelings, right? How do you feel about starter fertilizer? I love it. I hate it. Depends if it's Tuesday or Thursday, right? Which one of those two it is. It ranges wide. So let me suggest a few. I got Bobby backstop, right? Nothing gets past Bobby. I've been using starter fertilizer for 10 years. It's part of my program, no looking back. I've got Alan the adopter. I'm optimistic about new biologicals. I think they're going to be a game changer. Alan cannot wait for the next new formulation to put into the trench and see what it's going to do. Okay? You got Skylar the skeptic who thinks you guys are all nuts for doing that much, putting that much toxicity and that much tillage so close to the seed. Okay? You're playing with fire. You got Grandpa George. Those boys are putting on so many pumps and hoses onto the planter, I can't even think about running it anymore. Right? Complexity. And you got Freddie Financial, who soberly looks at you and says, I've run the numbers. It's a tough sell. Granted, the plants look great early on, but the added yield questionably covers the added cost. Right? Does that pretty well cover the waterfront of emotion around starter fertilizer? Right? It's wide-ranging. You will not find that same breadth of emotion around nitrogen. Right? Everybody is a believer in nitrogen. Everybody's going to put it on. It's just a question of how much, when, and where. Right? So I'd like to just consolidate the concerns around starter fertilizer down to 2 categories. Okay? The first category is the concentration of salt. That's a concern. And the second one is the concentration of cash. That's a concern. Okay? So let's talk about the salt first. Whenever you read an article on starter fertilizer, it's just a matter of time before you come across one of these sentences that I've highlighted in light blue. The limitation of in-furrow or pop-up fertilizer placement, as it's often referred to, is that many of the nutrients are in salt formulation and can prove to be very toxic to germinating crops. Right? Let's face it, most starter fertilizers are in salt formulation and they're toxic. And when you start putting them on seed or near seed, you're playing with fire, right? Known issue. So I thought that the table on the bottom right corner does a good job of just illustrating this. It's a report by, again, Pioneer, same report. And this is for 1034.0, which is at the higher end of the salt index, okay? For 1034.0, they say if you're going to put it on seed, no more than 5 gallons per acre. If you're going to put it a quarter to a half an inch away, you can go up to 10 gallons per acre. If you're going to go to an inch, you can go to 20 gallons per acre. And if you go to 2 inches away, sky's the limit. Okay? You see the trend. The further you get away from the seed, the more concentration you can live with without risking your seed or your seedling roots. Okay? But there's a trade-off. The further you get away, what happens? The less likely that your roots, your early seedling roots, are going to find that fertility band. So we're dancing, right? Got to find the balance. That's concentration of salt. Let's talk about concentration of cash. We figure $400 a ton for 1034.0. A little bit of zinc, we're looking at $3 a gallon. If you're running a low salt formulation, you're probably looking at double that amount for the same fertility. So at 2.5 gallons, we're looking at $750, and if we go to 15 gallons an acre, we're putting on $45 an acre. That's a high concentration of cash. Freddie Financial is going to furrow his eyebrows and say, "Why are you doing that?" Right? So I want to address both of those. So first, let's talk about the concentration of salt. I think Greg introduced this morning. This is the wave. These are the 2 bolts that hold your closing casting on your row unit. Use the same 2 bolts for the Bandit. So here's your closing system. Here's your gauge wheels and your opening discs. We sit in between, right? So it's got a flexing blade, a trailering blade, so when you go around a right turn, the blade doesn't go into your seed trench. When you go around the left turn, it pushes away from the seed trench. It's also spring-loaded. So it's got 3 inches of travel to go up and over rocks, okay? And then it's laser cladded here to give you self-sharpening, very similar to a beaver tooth, so that it'll stay sharp over time. Okay. Pass that around. So, in all due respect, right, that blade is a plow, right? That blade is turning over soil and it's doing tillage. So I'd like to talk about just the 4 types of tillage that we're doing right there in the furrow area. The first one is the sidewall, right? The opening discs require hundreds of pounds to shove into the ground. They push out sideways with over 1,000 pounds. The discs are rotating. You're creating a density layer at the surface of your V trench. The first tillage we do is we come in about a ½ inch to an inch from the top, and we completely blow away the bottom 2/3 of the right side of your V trench. Okay? And now we give clean line of sight for the nodal roots to head down. That's number 1. Number 2, this blade is running 3/4 an inch over and 1/4 to 3/4 an inch below. And that naturally, as it pushes that soil over, it creates a natural fracture path between the bottom of the seed trench and the bottom of the blade. When you go out this afternoon into the tram, Greg or Tim, I'm not sure who does it, they'll get the air compressor out and they'll blow out the trench with the wave. Instead of being this wide, it'll be this wide. We completely fractured that soil between the seed and the fertility. And it creates a natural density layer that wave guides the radical root right down to the fertility. Okay? That's number 2. Number 3, as we're rolling over that soil, we're taking soil from the bottom half of the seed trench, your moist soil, and we're rolling it over the top of the seed. And we're encapsulating the seed in moist soil. Okay? And that way when your closing system comes and puts in bug dust, the seed's protected and surrounded by cold, moist soil. Okay? And 4th, as this blade bludgeons in to push the soil to the left, so ahead of the blade, we got the Keaton seed firmer that pushes down on the seed and firms it from the top, and then we got that soil moving in from the right that hugs it in and side firms it. So we're doing a double firming on the seed. Okay? And what that does is that gives you better seed to soil contact and better emergence. So that's the micro tillage that we're doing. I'd like to just propel this notion that we should think of the wave as a pre-closing system. Okay? The hardest work that a closing system has to do is the bottom third of the trench, right? It's easy to close the top 2/3. It's hard to close the bottom third and get good seed to soil contact. So this is really doing all the work down in the bottom third, and it's doing a pre-closing. So we're taking a lot of responsibility off your normal closing system of what it's expected to do. Okay, so that could put us in a world where we're using a much simpler, lower cost closing system. Okay, so that deals with the concentration of salt. We're putting it down in here where it's a safe area of toxicity. Wayne?
Without fertilizer, but using this, would there be some yield benefit?
So without fertilizer, just the pre-closing alone is their benefit. We anticipate, yes. It hasn't been proven, but for like soybeans, it might be just use it just for that alone, right? Just no fertilizer. But yeah, the idea is that we think fertilizer is going to get us onto the planter, and it's going to be this pre-closing system that's going to keep us on the planter. Good question. So that's the concentration of salt. Let's now talk about the concentration of cash. Okay, this is the dash valve, and we introduced this a year or two ago, and it's a very high-speed valve that has the ability to turn on and off flow on a per seed basis. Okay, so it senses the seed, it turns on and off wastes the prescribed amount of milliseconds and turns on the flow. Okay, it's got a flow meter, it's got a pressure sensor, it's a highly sensorized, high-speed valve that brings that information up to the cab. Okay, now I've got to introduce a new definition. Okay, and that is I'm going to set this up by asking the question: what do we mean by 5 gallons per acre? Right? Justin, why are you asking that question? That's so trivial. Why are you asking me that question? It means if I plant an acre of ground, I need 5 gallons, right? With this, it's no longer true. Okay, and I want to explain what I mean. Okay, and I want to introduce the term of local concentration. When we're turning on the dash for each seed, the flow rate coming out is the same as if we were running continuously. Okay, so if we're running 15 gallons an acre at 6 miles an hour, we need a half a gallon a minute. When the dash is on, it's running at that flow rate. Okay, all we're doing with the dash valve is turning it off in between every seed. Okay, so by way of illustration, if we're planting a seed every 6 inches and we're going to put a 2-inch dash, we're going to be putting a local concentration of 15 gallons per acre. We're going to be flowing at a half a gallon a minute during that dash. Then we're going to turn it off for 4 inches and turn it back on for the next seed for 2 inches, turn it off for 4, and turn it back on for 2. Okay? So now, instead of delivering 15 gallons to the field, we only deliver 5. Okay? And the seed doesn't know the difference. When the seed wakes up and sends out those early roots and it sees that concentrated band, it's going to be the same as if he ran concentrated. What the seedling doesn't know and doesn't need to know is that 3 inches away, there's nothing. Right? Because by the time the roots get out there, the window of utility, the window of return on investment is past. Right? Okay? So let me introduce it, and we'll hit that again. Let me introduce the plots that you see ahead of you. If you look off to your right, you'll see red ribbons. Okay, that's 8 plants. Then there's blue and green and pink. Then it repeats over here: blue, green, and pink. All right. So those are each strips, and we ran with our 8-row planter, and we had dash and wave on the planter. And I'll set up this plot a little bit. The red ribbons over there are the check. Nothing going through the wave. And then the next 3 sets are 15 gallons per acre local concentration. The next 3 are 5 gallons per acre local concentration. Okay? So let me drive home this local concentration again. If we're running continuous flow at 5 gallons an acre, how much do we take to the field? 5 gallons, right? If we're running a 3-inch dash, we're turning it off half the time. At 5 gallons local concentration, we only need 2.5 gallons delivered. If we're running 2-inch dash, we only have to take 1 2/3 gallons to the field. I'll do the same thing for 15 gallons. If we're running 15 gallons local concentration continuous, we have to take 15 gallons. If we're running 3-inch dash, we only take 7.5. And if we're running 2-inch dash, we only take 5 gallons to the field. Okay? That's the difference between $45 an acre and $15 an acre. Okay? And the whole idea, it's predicated that the seed and the plant during that critical time doesn't know the difference. Okay? So this white circle up here shows where we have been allowed to have a playground. So we can, at north 30 feet, we can dig and cut down plants or whatever we want to do. And I just want to show you some of the things we learned there. This was lost on me, but when the corn is first spiking, I had no idea what the roots looked like then. So it's just fun to come out and dig the roots and to walk that through. But the only root activity when we're spiking is the radical root is heading out and down. Okay? If you look real close to the seed, you'll see just the first evidence of some small feeder roots. They're starting to come out right around the seed area. But there's no nutrients that are coming through the root system at this point. Okay? It's living totally off the starch of the seed. This is 1 week. 1 week after we planted. We planted on the 16th, this is the 23rd. They're spiking. It's warm temperatures, right? Now, a week later, at 2 weeks, total different ballgame, right? Now your nodal roots are coming out. They're still bald. They don't have any hair on them. But look at the radical. It found fertility and it has dozens of feeder roots on it. So somewhere between day 7 and day 14, this radical root just exploded. Okay, this is pulling in nutrients. This is in a rich band and it's pulling in nutrients and it's affecting this plant already. And this is why we say when you're going to use starter fertilizer effectively, you need to impact the radical root. It's not enough just to impact the crown ones later on. Okay, this one's already been feeding for somewhere to five days, and these first crowns, they haven't seen anything yet. Okay, let's advance ahead 2 weeks. This is at 1 month after we planted, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see better. But I've pulled off all the crown 4s, the crown 3s, and I've only left the crown 2s and 1s. Okay, in the radical. Look at the difference in feeder root density on the left versus the right. It is amazing how the roots, as they're going down, they're sending out search parties to find fertility. When they find it, it's like ants. They overpopulate, okay? And they begin the extraction of that gold, right? It really shows up in this next picture. This is at 2.5 weeks. And I've pointed arrows at the 4 crown 1 roots. The black arrows are pointing at the 2 crown 1s on the left side of the trench, and the red arrows are pointing at the 2 crown 1s on the right side of the trench. What's different? One found gold and one didn't, right? These guys are just heading down. They're sending out the little search parties. They're not finding anything. They just keep going down. These guys send out search parties. So, whoa, look out, right? We found the mother lode, and all of a sudden it just branches out and explodes with feeder roots. Okay, so. Some people have asked whether this is good or bad, that 2 roots get it and 2 roots don't. Okay, here's my story that I'd like to propel and just see if it gets pushback or feedback. And I think that when we talk about putting in banded phosphorus, high concentration is good. The higher the concentration, the better, until you do crop damage. Okay, so if you can place it far enough away so it's seed safe and root safe, you want to be as high a concentration as possible. And here's why. What happens with phosphorus generally when you put it in a field? It gets gobbled up by the soil, right? Through fixation. The soil grabs it. And until mineralization happens, it's not available. When you put a very concentrated band, there's just not enough motel rooms. And so the soil can't gobble it all up, and so it stays in a usable form that the plant can get that year. And so your return on investment's better because you get it immediately instead of waiting 2, 4, 6 years later on. Okay? So I think high concentration is good, and we're only talking phosphorus only makes up 0.2% of the plant's mass. You don't need a lot of phosphorus. It's not like nitrogen where you've got to pump up gallons of water to get nitrogen in the plant. Small amounts. So when those roots find it, this plant's going to be happy dance. Okay? As far as weights go, this is the June 17th date. We went out 5 dates, 31, then 3, 5, 10, and 17th of June. This is the 17th of June for the check. So we're getting that V5, V6 now. We're getting to the stage where it's past getting out of adolescence when it's making those lifelong decisions. And to show you the data, these are the dates from 31 May through 17th of June. These are grams, the weight of 10 plants. And the two gray and black are the check strips. The red are the 5 gallons per acre, and the blue is the 15 gallons per acre. So just note what we expect, right? It took 31 days to get to V5 for the check strip. And for this one, it took only 26, 5 days earlier, right? It's doing exactly what we expected. It's getting to that stage 3 to 5 days sooner, right? Right on schedule. And this year was not about immobilization events. We planned on May 16th, no looking back. This is all about advancing the growth and trying to get those solar collectors up earlier than later. Okay? So advance now to 2 months old, and now you start to see the difference between both the check versus the 15 gallons per acre, but you also see a difference between 15 and 5 gallons per acre, right? This had plenty to get us through adolescence, through V5, V6, but this still had luxury left over, and it's still pumping the plant and pushing it even after that stage. So is this good or bad to have such big ears right now? Right? We don't know. What we do know is that these ears experienced a different pollination window than these. We do know that these ears are going to experience a different kernel fill window than these. That may be good, that may be bad. That's why starter fertilizer is so emotional, right? 1 year it pays, 1 year it doesn't. It just all depends on the roll of the dice. What it does do, and where it really gives it the advantage, is it's an insurance policy to make sure that you're going to weather all those immobilization cycles, and you're going to have good kernels and girth and length when you come into that adult phase of V6 and beyond. That's where the real bang for the buck is. Okay? Shows up here as well. Came out last week. We did ear weights and kernel counts. This is the check. This is the 15 gallons. This is the 5 gallons. And this is 2 inch, 3 inch, and continuous. So what's not clear on this picture, but it's clear in the data, is that all 6 of these weigh a lot more than this one, right? Which is what we expect. They're just developmentally ahead. Maybe good, maybe bad. But the main story that I wanted to say here is you look at the big numbers at the top left corner of every picture. That's the number of average kernels per ear for that data set, okay? And these are all in that 600 kernel range. And I think that that's the storyline of starter fertilizer. We want to, on the early planted stuff, we want to make sure that it gets past that V5, V6, and it's got well positioned to go 600 plus kernels, is depending on how the season plays out. Because the reality of it is 600 kernels per ear, depending on your kernel fill, depending on when it takes 85,000 kernels per bushel or 75,000 kernels per bushel, that'll hunt, right? 276 bushels, 244 bushels. So getting 600 kernel ears is a good thing. So that's the main storyline with starter fertilizers. Putting it in a position that's safe, lowering your costs, and getting an insurance policy during the early phase of growth that's going to make sure that as it goes through the immobilization events, it's not going to pull back on the girth and length. Fair enough? Let's summarize with our emoticons. So what are we going to do for Bobby Backstop? Right? He's doing it anyway. We're offering him a safer placement. We're offering him some pre-closing, and we're offering him the opportunity to save money. With Alan the adopter, there's a lot of things we don't know about biologicals, but one thing we do know about them is they're expensive, right? And I think that we can all say and all agree that when we put that band right near the seed, that's where the biologicals are going to have their impact, where they have impact roots. Okay? Skylar the skeptic, we're taking care of the toxicity issue by getting that fertility 3/4 of an inch away from the seed. For Grandpa George, at least we're giving him a highly sensorized valve so he can know when something's not right and when things are going right, and he can communicate that to the boys. Okay? And for Freddie Financial, I think there's a clear story that instead of the starter bill this year being $60,000, it's only going to be $20,000. That'll make him smile.